An artist, he paints with lakes and wooded slopes, with lawns and banks and forest-covered hills, with mountainsides and ocean views. Daniel Burnham.
Though famed as a landscape architect, Frederick Law Olmsted was also a pragmatist, a conservationist, and an egalitarian. Through his parks, he conveyed his philosophy, setting the groundwork for various social movements in the 19th century. Frederick Law Olmsted, the planner of the Exposition.
Frederick Law Olmsted was born in Hartford, Connecticut on April 26, 1822. Olmsted grew up in an age of tremendous industrial growth. It was a time of great industrial progress and urbanization, but this mechanical progress came with substantial trade-offs. As cities ballooned in size, their sanitation issues also grew. Pollution from factories was filling up great American rivers like the Hudson, while resources were being consumed at an unprecedented rate. Not only were cities becoming physically worse, but they were deteriorating socially too. Poverty was at an all-time high, and immigration sparked racial tensions across an economically polarized America. Olmsted would dedicate himself to redefining and clearing the American landscape to drive for this needed social change. However, as a young man, Olmsted struggled to find his calling. He traveled around the world and explored many career paths such as chemistry, sailing, geology, scientific farming, and journalism. He traveled to England and was inspired by the magnificence of the parks and gardens there. He also traveled to the American South, where he developed strong feelings about abolition and equality.
Olmsted eventually became superintendent of a project, clearing a large area of land to be turned into a park in New York City. After draining swamps and removing the ruins of buildings, Olmsted was approached by Calvert Vaux, a French-trained architect who invited him to form a partnership on a design that would be submitted to the park's design contest. In April of 1858, Olmsted and Vaux were declared the winners with their plan titled Greensward and received the commission to build the park. Work on the park lasted for 3 years. Olmsted would soon become famous for designing New York City's Central Park. Drawing from his experiences, Olmsted created America's first major egalitarian park. Olmsted believed that
the park is intended to furnish the healthful recreation for the poor and the rich, the young and the old, the vicious and the virtuous.
This is exemplified by Central Park's famed lakefront with its large, lush, open greens, where people can meet, have picnics, and in the winter, ice skate.
Olmsted wrote extensively about how public parks and other design landscapes could be just that, could be the great meeting places of a diverse society in which all people, regardless of their backgrounds, economic backgrounds, ethnic backgrounds, etc., could come together literally on common ground.
It was then that Olmsted found his calling, realizing that he could harness parks to create a cleaner and more beautiful American city. Olmsted finished work on the park in 1862.
Well, I think when people first came, they thought it was the eighth wonder of the world. People were very proud of the fact that they had this amazing park.
While Olmsted was proud of his impact on Central Park, he felt it was his duty to serve in the ongoing Civil War. However, due to a leg injury he sustained while working on Central Park, he could not fight. Since he had read about the bloodshed of the Civil War and the spread of disease due to lack of sanitation, Olmsted pushed for legislation that would merge the Medical Bureau, an inefficient and chaotic organization, with other volunteer groups to create the United States Sanitary Commission. Olmsted led the USSC to become a coordinated, organized, and dynamic institution. The Commission's main goals would be to prevent the spread of diseases, to treat wounded soldiers, and to raise money and supplies for the Army. When Olmsted resigned from the Commission in September of 1863, he had grown the Commission into a massive organization that had increased the survival rate of wounded soldiers and assisted in many battles during the war. The Commission would continue to be impactful and eventually developed into the United States Red Cross Foundation. Olmsted soon ran into financial issues and decided to move west. There, he was greatly impacted by the beautiful scenery that surrounded him, which led him to begin his first large-scale conservation project, the Yosemite Valley. Because of his famed work on Central Park, Olmsted was invited to chair the commission by Senator John Conness, who had led the passing of a bill to preserve the land. Olmsted accepted this leadership role and immediately began taking steps to protect the landscape. Olmsted began by surveying and creating a report on the land. This survey and report would later help to convince the federal government to convert the land into Yosemite National Park. In 1879, Olmsted continued his support of conservation when he began to work on the New York State Survey to create a special report on the area around Niagara Falls. Along with this report, he started a petition and gained signatures from Ralph Waldo Emerson, Grover Cleveland, and Thomas Carlyle. This petition convinced the New York State Legislature to purchase this land and set up a 5-person commission to restore the area from its industrialized state. He destroyed factories on Goat and Bath Islands, eliminating all of the industrial mills from the area. His leadership would be the driving force behind one of America's most iconic locations.
Olmsted's most impressive act of conservation was when he worked on the Biltmore Estate in 1888. George Washington Vanderbilt asked Olmsted to create a large developed park out of this immense piece of land. However, Olmsted argued that a private park serves no social purpose and entreated Vanderbilt to both preserve the land and make it accessible to the public. Olmsted successfully convinced one of the most powerful men of the time to create the first official forestry conservation in the United States, setting a precedent for future conservation efforts around the country. Alongside his conservation efforts, Olmsted continued to be a leader in the field of landscape architecture. He re-established his partnership with Calvert Vaux when they worked on Brooklyn's Prospect Park. They started surveying the park in January of 1865 and completed it in 1867. Following the park's completion, the two would establish Vaux, Olmsted and Company, coining the term landscape architects and establishing the legitimacy of the field. Many cities hired Vaux and Olmsted to design new parks due to their famed work on Central Park.
There was no other park built in any city in America or in the world that was so expansive.
From 1867 to 1873, representatives from cities such as Chicago, Albany, Berkeley, and Buffalo approached and hired Vaux, Olmsted and Company to design landscapes. Olmsted believed that urban parks could be the solution to the problems of industrialism.
You step into these beautiful parks, and to some degree you're sheltered from the noise and the smoke and the exhaust and all the aspects of urban life.
Olmsted's greatest achievement during this time was the expansion of his egalitarian ideals. His most famed example of this is the Buffalo Park system, where he connected many of the city's parks into one uniform landscape through tree-filled and seemingly natural parkways. As a result, people from completely different racial backgrounds and social classes were able to intermingle all over the city in Olmsted's beautiful parks.
Well, essentially, he set the foundation for all park systems.
I guess if they hadn't existed, like Central Park system in Buffalo, American cities would have been far more brutal places, and there probably would have been a lot more social discord.
Another one of Olmsted's greatest achievements during this time was the grounds for the Chicago World's Fair. Olmsted chose the site of the fair and began to lay out the plan on the shore of Lake Michigan, where he would direct the construction of the Columbian Exposition.
He wasn't the single visionary for the architecture necessarily, but he sort of led the vision for a unified layout.
Olmsted's overarching leadership on the project earned him the title Planner of the Exposition. Olmsted flawlessly combined the newest technological innovations with natural scenery and parks. After the World's Fair ended, the buildings known as the White City were slowly dismantled, but Olmsted's landscape is still enjoyed today in the former Jackson Park.
By 1895, the burdens of old age forced Olmsted to retire. He passed away on August 28, 1903, but his legacy lives on. Olmsted once stated,
"I don't care a copper for myself, sir, or for what becomes of me, but I do care for the park, which will last long after I'm dead and gone. Years and years, I hope."
While most of America was engulfed by industrialist ideals, mechanical progress, and racial tension, Olmsted went against the norm. His ideas about naturalism, egalitarianism, and health were progressive for his time. His work touched many fields, areas, and people across America.
Olmsted's greatest legacy is physical. It's the landscapes themselves. There are hundreds of parks in American cities and parkways, as well as institutional landscapes and residential design. So he was no mere theorist. He really built hundreds and hundreds of landscapes, and that is the physical legacy.
The most famous of his parks are Central Park, Prospect Park, and Jackson Park. Olmsted also wrote more than 6,000 letters and reports dealing with his commissions and surveys that are still used by the Park Service today. His call for conservation and love of nature would manifest in the creation of the National Park Service in 1916.
So he created the bones, if you will, of all future parkland.
Olmsted's ideas about sanitation and bacterial safety helped move the country towards modern sanitation, and his ideas would lead to the foundation of key health organizations, such as the Red Cross and the U.S. Department of Sanitation. But truly, Olmsted's parks embodied his ideals. They provided oases of nature within the industrial late 19th century. They also represented the equality Olmsted envisioned, allowing access to all, ignoring gender, race, and class. Olmsted's leadership and legacy stemmed from his ability to engage Americans with his philosophy as he paved the way for racial, sanitary, and environmental progress.